All right, welcome back. Today we're going to be going over design fundamentals. All right, so the reason why we're putting this in here in Intro to Web is because to make an effective project, particularly for the front end, you really do need to understand some of these design fundamentals and make sure that you're thinking about the user and how people are going to be using your software. And these concepts take a little bit of time to get right and to get that mental model where you're actually using it appropriately and effectively. But we have to start here, and we have to start at a point where you're at least exposed to some of these concepts. And then if you go on, there is an elective called HCI, which you'll be able to a little bit more thoroughly go over these concepts and practice it a little bit more here at Alfred State. So the first thing that we got to do is set some of the groundwork. We got to go over some high level concepts here. So in general, you kind of want to make sure that your website follows function. Your form is going to follow that function. All right, you start getting off in the weeds when you start doing artistic things, and there's a time and a place for that. But most of the time, if you're going to end up on worst websites ever, it's going to be because you did something that was based on artistic expression rather than thinking about the user and how do we do or present or integrate this feature appropriately. Okay. The second thing is that aesthetics tend to come after usability. All right. Now, with that said, there are things that we will be going over here shortly that are just kind of groundwork. You can integrate it into anything, and it really does help your aesthetic out. All right. One way that you can do a very good job on your project, if you have the budget and the time, is you need to be able to get some user data on your prototypes. Now, I have been a part of companies where the prototype becomes the product, and that is not the best thing in the world to do, but it does happen. It is out there, and there are a lot of companies that operate that way. But if you have the opportunity to do so, where you can actually test your front-end development in terms of what users actually think about it, go ahead and do so, because you're always going to be surprised. There's always going to be something that you did not consider, and it's going to make your product better. And the last thing that I'm going to say in terms of high-level concept is don't think you already understand what your users want, what your users are going to do, or how your users are going to use your software. You're going to be wrong. There are going to be scenarios where, or particular people that prioritize different things rather than the rest of the population. Now, with that said, the more precise that you can get for a user demographic, the better that you can get at predicting particular features and how they're going to land. So, something to keep in mind. And now we're going to actually go over some of the Agile concepts that we need to get down relatively well. So the first thing is contrast, right? This is by far the easiest thing to do and by far the easiest thing to screw up. So people are hypersensitive to contrast, and this is partially how compression algorithms work for pictures. They keep the contrast, but they reduce the color. People aren't really super sensitive to color changes, but they are to contrast changes. And this is a good example, or that is a good example of how people are very sensitive to contrast and not necessarily color. Okay, so what we're going to do here is show you a handful of examples of what good contrast looks like, and then we'll go over how to check if you actually have good contrast or not. So we're going to use YouTube as an example because it's a very good site in terms of contrast. So this is basically a blank canvas. So we have the white background, we have our black text, and then we have our images or our thumbnails, whatever the creator is trying to do here, on display here. So if we do this, if we take a look here, everything looks right. Everything is high contrast. I can read it. But if we turn it into grayscale, I can still read it. It's still fine, right? And this is kind of the quickest way to test if you have good contrast in your projects. So this is what I would do, and this is what a lot of other people do as well. All right, so let's move on to a different example. This is a project that I was working on a handful of months ago. Same thing here. We have the right, which is the fully colored version with gradients, and this is a little bit harder to make sure that you actually have right. And if you look at the grayscale, it's equally as good. It doesn't have as high as contrast as what YouTube did for the white on black, but it's still perfectly fine. I can read it. Everything is good. We're doing okay here. Okay, so let's move on to proportions. In general, your proportions are relative to something else. And what I mean by that is we can create a ratio off of that, and that ratio, try to follow the golden ratio. So the formula is put up on here. I'm going to show you again a few examples of what golden ratio looks like in terms of everything being very relative to itself. But if you want something that looks good, that is appealing, but it's just a form, or is it just a thing that someone else has done 1,000 times before, and you want to make it look good and you don't have that artistic expression freedom, well, you can use this. So Facebook is a good example of this. Twitter, that's coming up next, is another good example. But if we overlay the golden ratio, the graphical version of it, over the interface here at Facebook, hey, they got it. They thought about it. It's right there. And there's a part of reason why Facebook is as successful as it is. Same thing with Twitter, right? So Twitter's got the same thing going on. All right, let's move on. So this is where we have to talk about another concept. So if you're looking at this photo, ignore the color. What do you think is most important? Which circle is most important? So there's basically two answers here. And the reason why I told you to ignore the color is because a lot of people say, well, 3 is the most important because it's the warmest color. Okay, that is a thing, sort of. It's not a very strong correlation, but a lot of people answer number 1 in terms of what we call visual hierarchy. So the larger the item, the more precedence is going to be given, the more importance is going to be given. So if we come over here, Amazon has done this through size and color, but in general, size is going to be paramount for visual hierarchy. Okay. Hicks law. Well, user choice. Okay. A lot of people want the simple choice, something that's easy, and they're going to tell you that they want more choice. What they're really saying is that they want more control. So as long as they have control and choice, it's going to be okay. As soon as you get into the realm of there's so many choices that they don't have control, you got a problem. So there obviously is the very famous study of jam, where there were 6, I believe it was 6 jars of jam, hyper sold. And then they're like, well, more must be better. So we'll have, I think it was 64 jars of jam, and it dramatically underperformed relative to the 6 jars of jam. So Hicks law, be mindful of your selection and what people have in terms of control. Control is an important factor here. Okay, so if we come over here, this is a good example. If someone's new to this site, they're going to be very frustrated. There's too many examples. Just in this screen alone, there's 40 links. And especially if you're not a computer hardware enthusiast, you don't know what these links even do. So this is, I don't want to say it's a problem, because Newegg has a very precise demographic that they're appealing to, and it's their boon and their bane at the same time, because they can't break into new markets effectively. But this is a good example of someone new here is going to get very frustrated very quickly. And one of the things that we haven't talked about yet, and the reason why it's still like this, because it's been like this for many, many years, is as soon as your user, your demographic, that does come here quite a bit, learns the UI, you can't change it. And the reason for that is because people function off of heuristics and mental models to be able to get around. And as soon as they do that, their sales are going to get crushed by all their repeat customers. So they can't change this really. And the only way to change it is to be very, very slow about it. Move things very, very slowly. And it'd probably take a couple years to do so without having a massive performance hit in terms of sales. So, Fitts Law is another concept that we need to go over. It's a targeting algorithm at its base, but essentially what we can derive from this targeting algorithm is relational importance. So relative to the width, how easy it is to target, and then relative to the distance away that you are starting from. So if I'm going here and then I'm coming over here, this nice big button like this, and you're right here, is going to be related more easily than something that's in the same exact spot, but has a very small button over here, where it's not going to be related as easily. So this is Fitts' Law. Rule of thirds. So this is your graphics, which are very, very important on the web at this point. You have to be able to display that story, display that image in a way that is, I don't want to call it entertaining, but interesting. Okay, so rule of thirds, you put your main subject in 1/3 of the image. The only reason why you wouldn't do this is if you had a very good reason not to. So portrait pictures are like that. Panoramic, where the subject is the forest, essentially. There probably are a couple other options out there in terms of why you wouldn't do a rule of thirds on your graphics, but for the most part, yeah, you're going to need the rule of thirds. All right, color theory. So this is where we have to talk about how colors are perceived. And again, this is a very high level exposure to some of these things. So warm colors, as shown over here, these are obviously going to be perceived as warm. So generally speaking, you want to match your warm colors with the environment that it's in. So what I mean by that is don't have a snowy winter wonderland going on and all your colors be orange and yellows and reds. It's not going to work out for you. It's just going to look weird. And the same thing, vice versa over here. Cool colors. Don't have a beach and then have this violet and dark blue as a main color scheme for your website. Okay. All right. So, color palettes. There are basically 3 ways that you can do this, or at least as starting points. There are other ways that you can accomplish things that are a little bit more complex, but generally speaking, you want to start at this type of level. So we have colors that are right next to each other on the color wheel. So right next to each other on the color wheel. So 1, 2, and 3, like this. And then these will blend in relatively nicely. So this really helps for making sure that you don't have a dramatic change in something, but it's really hard to get the contrast right on this. So these would be really good for like background colors and things that need to blend in, and then you're going to use something like text or images to really pop out, and that's going to be your contrast. So that is one. Complementary, used everywhere because it is hyper successful. That's right. It's good for contrast. It's good for in terms of just matching colors together, because these are essentially the colors that go well together. So there's a reason why the Christmas colors are red and green, right? So there's a reason why those things exist, and there's a reason why something like blue and orange these are high school colors everywhere. Or well, black and red is another popular one, but yeah, or something like Alfred University, if you're local, it's a little off from a gold color, but then purple, right? There's a reason why schools pick the colors that they do. Okay, triadic, which is just 3 colors. This is really good for logos, essentially. It can be done on websites as well, but you're going to find it most of the time on logos because it just works out a little bit better that way. So think like Burger King logo, where you got the yellow and then the blue. I forgot what the other color is. But as you probably seen on the screen already, I have a meeting to go to. And I will see you guys in the next one. The next one we'll be doing an actual project, and we're going to be doing it in real time. So yeah, stick around for that one.